All right, today we're jumping into a huge case, a real landmark decision that basically drew a line in the sand. It's all about the tension between a government's power and a country's constitution. You could say this is the story of a battle for the very soul of Indian democracy. So the whole thing really boils down to this one massive question. Can Parliament just change the very soul of the Constitution? I mean, can a government, just because it has a majority, rewrite the most fundamental rules of the entire country? Can it just grant itself unlimited power? That's the huge, high-stakes question the Supreme Court was staring down. So how does a showdown like this even start? Well, you'd think it would begin with some huge political movement, right? But nope. This epic constitutional battle actually started with something much smaller, a single struggling textile company. Okay, so here's the quick backstory. You've got this company, Minerva Mills, and it's not doing well. It's failing. So back in 1971, the government steps in and takes it over. Now, the key thing here isn't just the takeover, it's how they did it. They put the law that allowed the takeover into something called the Ninth Schedule. And you can think of the Ninth Schedule as like a constitutional lockbox. Anything you put in there is totally shielded from the courts. No judge can touch it or question it. And that move right there is what set the stage for this massive conflict. Now, that whole takeover thing, it was really just a symptom of something way bigger that was going on. See, Parliament wasn't just interested in one textile mill. No. They had their eyes on a much bigger prize, fundamentally redefining their own power. And that brings us to 1976, when Parliament passed the 42nd Amendment. And let me tell you, this was nothing short of a constitutional earthquake. It was this massive attempt to completely shift the balance of power in the country, to put Parliament at the very top, above everything and everyone else, above the courts, and yeah, even above your fundamental rights as an individual. Think of it like this, like a game with a rule book. The original Constitution, that's the rule book, and it has these clear rules to make sure there's a balance of power, right? Well, the 42nd Amendment was basically Parliament trying to grab that rule book and rewrite it completely in their own favor. It pretty much said, hey, guess what? Parliament now has unlimited power. Oh, and by the way, the courts, they can't check our work anymore. And those big state goals, yeah, those are now way more important than your personal freedoms. So you see, this wasn't just changing a rule. This was trying to change the entire game. Okay, so naturally, the owners of Minerva Mills weren't just going to take this. They challenged what the government did, and the whole thing landed right in the lap of the Supreme Court. Now, the court had to cut through all the politics, all the noise, and answer two incredibly specific and powerful questions. So question number one was all about balance. See, on one hand, the Constitution gives you, as an individual, fundamental rights, things like freedom of speech, equality. But on the other hand, it also lays out these things called directive principles, which are basically big goals for the country, like achieving economic justice. The government's argument was that these big national goals should be able to just completely trample over your individual rights. So the court had to figure out, where's the line here? How do you balance the two? And then came the second question, which was, if you can believe it, even more fundamental. It was this: can Parliament just declare itself all-powerful? Can it literally pass an amendment that says, from now on, we can do whatever we want and no court in the land can stop us? I mean, this question strikes right at the very heart of what it means to have a limited democratic government. So the stage is set. The whole nation is watching. The Supreme Court is about to deliver its verdict. And by this point, everyone knew this wasn't really about a textile mill anymore. This was about the future of Indian democracy itself. So the court looked really closely at those two game-changing parts of the 42nd Amendment. You know, the bits that put state goals above your rights and gave Parliament unlimited power to change the Constitution. And after all that, their verdict was unconstitutional. Simple as that. The Supreme Court struck them down. It was this incredibly clear, powerful message. The court basically said, nope, Parliament, you have gone too far. You have overstepped your authority, and you have tried to damage the very foundation of the Constitution. And their reasoning was really simple, but also so profound. It's captured perfectly in this quote from the ruling. They basically argued that, look, if Parliament can just give itself unlimited power, what's to stop it from dismantling democracy piece by piece? They said that kind of unchecked power, that doesn't lead to a republic. It leads to an authoritarian state. Okay, so what's the big takeaway here? What was the lasting impact of this whole thing? Why do people still talk about this case as one of the most important in Indian history? Well, It's because the court didn't just make a ruling on a specific law. It stood up and defended a core fundamental principle. And that principle is something called the Basic Structure Doctrine. Now, this is a really crucial idea, so let's break it down. It basically says that, yes, Parliament can amend the Constitution. It can make changes. But what it cannot do is destroy its essential core features. It can't tamper with its very identity. The analogy I like is you can renovate a house, paint the walls, change the furniture, but you can't just go in and demolish the foundations. That's what the Basic Structure Doctrine protects. So in the end, the Minerva Mills case protected these essential pillars of the Constitution. First, it cemented the power of judicial review, making it crystal clear that courts can and will check the government's actions. Second, it restored that super important, delicate balance between your rights as an individual and the goals of the state. And maybe most importantly, it hammered home a core democratic principle, that the government is limited by the Constitution, not the other way around. So why are we digging up a case from 1980? Why does it still matter so much today? Because that fundamental tension it deals with, it never, ever goes away. In any democracy, the people who make the laws hold an incredible amount of power. And this case leaves us with this timeless, vital question we all have to think about. When the people in power try to rewrite the rules of the game in their own favor, who's there to protect the rules themselves? And that, at its heart, is what the Minerva Mills case was all about.